Hello viewers and welcome to yet another video production from Cardboard of the Rings, the bi-weekly podcast about the Lord of the Rings, the card game, which is a living card game by Fantasy Flight Games. Joining you as always, my name is Mitch, and with me today is Matthew.
Hello.
And we're here to wrap up our Sphere of Influence core set player and hero card analysis series. So why don't you go ahead and tell us, Matthew, a little bit about our very last sphere to cover?
Sure. Today we'll be covering the lore sphere, which emphasizes the potential of a hero's mind. So this sphere is all about intellect and wisdom and experience and really specialized knowledge. When I think of this sphere, I think of two things, basically. Card draw and healing effects.
Sure, I think I also think of things like high defense, a little bit of scrying, so being able to know what's going to be coming off of the encounter deck.
Right.
There's a little bit of peeking at shadow cards that goes on, and I think beyond that, maybe just a little bit of recursion effect, so bringing some cards back from the discard pile to your hand. But the lore sphere is just kind of a little bit more of an odd duck than some of the other spheres. It doesn't just define itself as one specific role.
Right. So let's take a look at our heroes. And we're starting off with Denethor, who has a threat cost of 8. He has 1 willpower, 1 attack strength, 3 defense strength, and 3 hit points. His traits are Gondor, Noble, and Steward, and his action reads, exhaust Denethor to look at the top card of the encounter deck. You may move that card to the bottom of the deck. I think he's a great defender with that defense of 3, and in fact, if my memory serves, he's the best defender in the core set with that 3 defense strength. But I think that his great defense strength is really negated by his ability, because you have to exhaust him to look at the top of the encounter deck, which means that you can't use him unless he has unexpected courage or something to then defend. So unexpected courage, I think, is really almost, I don't want to say a necessity, but would really be great on him. And as I've been saying in almost all of these series, he has the Gondor trait, so we may be seeing some added utility from him in the current cycle, which focuses on Gondor.
Yeah. I think the big concern for me with Denethor is definitely he's the only hero with 3 defense strength, up until we see Dana Ironfoot far later at the very tail end of the Shadows of Mirkwood cycle. He's the only hero that has 3 defense to start. But for a defender, it's almost a little bit confusing that he's got that very low 3 hit points. He's got very marginal attack and willpower, but at the same time, I really wouldn't have minded, say, 0 willpower or attack just to boost up his hit points a little bit further. And then just like you mentioned, if you're using him for his action, which I do like, it's a little bit of an advanced scrying ability. If there's something really nasty coming up, you can go ahead and just put it down to the bottom of the encounter deck, where hopefully you never have to deal with it. But if you're using that action, then you're not making use of his really great defense ability. So it's kind of an odd card that way.
Yeah, really is.
Yeah. But moving on to our next lore hero, we have Glorfindel, weighing in at 12 threats. He's got 3 willpower, 3 attack, 1 defense, and 5 hit points. He is Noble, Noldor, and Warrior, and his action is pay 1 resource from Glorfindel's resource pool in order to heal 1 damage on any character, but limit once per round. And just like you mentioned, Denethor really struggles because he has a limited number of actions each turn. Glorfindel is an exceptionally strong quester, an exceptionally strong attacker, but he really can't do both without a little bit of help. The 5 hit points is great for taking undefended attacks. His 1 defense is nothing to write home about, but, without some sort of action advantage effect, you're not using this 12-threat hero nearly to the best of his ability. And what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think like Aragorn, they have identical threat costs at 12, so that might hamper his usefulness. I know a lot of folks really, really didn't like Glorfindel. He's somewhat of a kind of sort of major character in the books, and a lot of folks didn't feel that this card lived up to his potential, which is why we get Glorfindel 2.0 in a later adventure pack. but I actually don't dislike him all that much. Again, the higher the threat cost typically means the better the stats, and he has fantastic stats. There aren't that many ways in the game, certainly in the core set, to heal other heroes or other allies consistently, and he is certainly a way to do that. So I like Glorfindel. I will admit that lore is probably my least favorite of the spheres. It's not one I play very often, and I'm probably attracted to him because his stats are so non-lore like to me. He's one I can absolutely see why people pass him up, but I think he can certainly be useful.
Yeah, I guess really the thing with me is, unless you've got some sort of action effect, it's just so much wasted threat. At least Aragorn has some sort of built-in readying effect. Mm-hmm. His action is certainly useful in that it's great to be able to just, from the onset of the game, you've got some sort of healing effect where it's like, I wasn't expecting this combination of encounter cards to come up. This character is really vulnerable, so I'm going to go ahead and strip that damage off of them. I think that's great, but as we go on, lore has plenty of other healing effects that are far more cost-effective than Glorfindel.
Right. Our last hero of the core set is Erebor, which I believe is another character that was made up by FFG. She has a threat cost of 10. She has 2 willpower, 2 attack strength, 2 defense strength, and 4 hit points. She is Dunedain and a ranger, and her action reads, exhaust Erebor to choose a player. That player draws 2 cards. We have used her quite a bit in the progression series so far, and as we've mentioned in pretty much every video we've used her, her effectiveness has been somewhat reduced by her errata, but I still think she's useful with good stats.
Definitely. I guess it's yet another instance of wanting her to have more actions. She's a very capable attacker. Her willpower is completely respectable. And as defense, she's got a high pool of hit points. She's got perfectly respectable defense value, but her threat is a little bit lofty, and of course her ability requires her to exhaust. So card draw in pretty much any card game is always fantastic, but she's really kind of a jack-of-all-trades hero. So, if you can give her additional actions, that's great, but most people will probably run her specifically for card draw.
Absolutely.
And I suppose now that we've covered our heroes, we'll go ahead and transition to the allies. And the first of which is Daughter of the Nimrodel. For a cost of 3, with 1 willpower, 0 attack, and 0 defense, this 1 hit point Sylvan ally's action is exhaust Daughter of the Nimrodel to heal up to 2 damage on any one hero. So it is one of the only healing effects in the game, which is very powerful. It's got a little bit of willpower, which is useful, but it's extremely fragile, and it can really only target heroes.
Weak stats, high cost, but a nice ability. The willpower is almost negated by the fact that you have to exhaust your daughter to heal anyone. So, she's certainly useful in quests where healing is key. But if healing isn't something you're too concerned about, I think she could perhaps be an ally you could leave in the binder.
Yeah, for a lot of decks, I tend to say just run 1 lore hero, so that cost of 3 can be a little bit steep. If you're running someone like, say, Glowin, where specifically you're planning on him taking a lot of damage to really amp up your resource generation, then it could work really well. But by herself, she's really frail. Awfully, susceptible to effects like the Necromancer's Reach, Evil Storm, so she's exceedingly fragile for, trying to prevent other characters from dying.
Right, absolutely. Next up is Erebor Hammersmith. He has a cost of 2, and his stats are 1 all around. 1 willpower, 1 attack strength, 1 defense strength, with 3 hit points. He's a dwarf and a craftsman. Be interesting if we ever got a craftsman card. His response reads, after you play Erebor Hammersmith, return the topmost attachment in any player's discard pile to his hand. I think that this ability is helpful in certain quests. Certainly, of course, once we get into Khazad-dûm and its adventure pack cycle, dwarves become great. His ability, though, you have to have attachments in your discard pile. If you don't, he's just sort of a mediocre ally, though he can soak up some damage.
Yeah, I mean, he definitely can. He's, like, compared to Wandering Toque, for 2 cost, it's 1/1/1/2, and this guy's got the bonus hit point, so for his cost, he is an awfully good defender. Occasionally, you're going to be able to return an attachment, and it'll just work out perfectly, like, a Power in the Earth we talked about last video. But maybe if you end up discarding an Unexpected Courage randomly from your hand or some sort of other horrible loss like that, he can really make a big difference for you. And of course, as more and more attachments come out, his ability and his use just becomes all the greater.
Yeah, absolutely.
So next up is yet another dwarf lore ally, which is Miner of the Iron Hills. So for a cost of 2, it is 0 willpower, 1 attack, 1 defense, and 2 hit points. So this dwarf's stats are nothing compared to the Hammersmith, but its response is unique. It is, after Miner of the Hills enters play, choose and discard 1 condition attachment from play. Playing through Passage Through Mirkwood and Escape from Dol Guldur, some of the nastiest cards you can ever encounter are that Caught in a Web. This is really the only way available to players to consistently get rid of those once they hit the table, and that's really what the Miner is for.
Right, I think, as you mentioned, he's incredibly helpful in certain quests. He has weak stats, so he's really used for his ability, but once we have heroes like Dane Ironfoot and some of the other dwarf synergy cards, this guy becomes more useful beyond just his ability.
Sure, and there's several other quests where getting rid of condition attachments is useful, like Conflict at the Carrock and whatnot, so...
Absolutely. Let's see, up next is Hinemarth Riversong, cost of 1, willpower of 1, attack strength of 1, defense strength of 0, and 1 single solitary hit point. He's a Sylvan ally, and his action reads, exhaust Hinemarth Riversong to look at the top card of the encounter deck. Again, you guys know my playstyle. This isn't, my cup of tea. Very weak, very fragile ally. Looking at the top card of the encounter deck, I suppose could let you know what's coming up. Do you need to use some of the heroes that can maybe cancel the effect or move it to the bottom or something? But just being able to look at it, I'm not sure that's the most useful effect.
Well, I feel for the cost of 1, it's certainly a pretty adept chump blocker. I think for a solo player game, being able to, for the cost of 1, put an ally into play where you're always going to know what's next off the encounter deck. You'll know exactly whether or not you need to leave resources open for response cards like Radagast's Cunning or a Test of Will. You're going to be able to, say, free up Denethor to focus on defending. But he's got 1 willpower for a cost of 1. He's got 1 attack. He is very fragile and he is unique, but he's completely replaceable. And I mentioned in the leadership video, Aragorn as an example. You'll be able to know, should I spend resources to use this card in preparation for other effects? So he's perfect for prediction, and for the core set, 1 resource, I think you probably can't go wrong. So if you've never used him in a solo deck, viewers, I would definitely suggest at least giving him a shot. But, of course, next up is another unique ally, which is Glia Wine. So for a cost of 2, it is 1 willpower, 0 attack, 0 defense, 2 hit points. It's the only minstrel, I believe, in the core set, and it is Rohan. And it is action, exhaust Glia Wine to choose a player. That player draws 1 card. So I do like the fact that it's repeatable, targetable card draw. He does have more than 1 hit point. He does have a little bit of willpower, but of course he is unique, so I'm very hesitant to include 3 in a deck. Card draw is always good, but it's a little bit of an investment to me, especially since I only ever play, say, 1 lore hero in a deck. It can be a little bit difficult to get him into play because so many other things take priority, but I definitely think if you've got a lot of lore resources available, he's worth shuffling into a deck.
I couldn't have said it better myself. I agree wholeheartedly.
All right.
So I think attachments are up next, and our first one for the lore sphere here is Forest Snare, which is a pretty darn good attachment, I think. It has a cost of 3. It's an item and a trap, and it reads, attached to an enemy engaged with a player. Attached enemy cannot attack. I think it's one of the top core lore sphere cards. Traps are seeing sort of a resurgence with Heirs of Numenor. In fact, I believe we have an ally or a hero, I'm not sure which, coming up that allows you to retrieve traps from your discard pile, which is pretty handy. So, it's a really good card. In the early days of the game, this was one of the best ways to deal with that hill troll if you didn't have an attack, sort of heavy tactics deck or something. I think it's pretty good.
Yeah, this does combo really well with the Erebor Hammersmith that we talked about, so instead of retrieving something like Power in the Earth, Forest Snare is naturally, hopefully, going to find its way into your discard pile at some point. It's effectively a kill spell, so as soon as you attach this to a creature engaged with you, it's not really going to be doing anything for the remainder of the game unless it's got some sort of awful ability. So it is a great remedy to get rid of a hill troll. I know during both of our attempts at Journey Along the Anduin, we really tried to dig for this card. I was kind of surprised at just how effectively and quickly we were able to kill the hill troll without this, but I certainly remember a lot of, tabletop games when I first opened up my core set where Forest Snare really came in handy. I think it's not always going to be great, and of course there's that errata for the Nazgul of Dol Guldur, where it's completely ineligible for Forest Snare, but it's a little expensive, but really it can remedy an awfully difficult situation. You just have to make sure you've got some sort of contingency plan to deal with the enemy attacking you that first turn before you can get to your planning and put this onto it.
Absolutely.
And up next is Protector of Lorien, another card that's taken a pretty significant hit due to errata, but it is a 1-cost attachment that is also a title. It is attached to a hero. Action: discard a card from your hand to give attached hero +1 defense or +1 willpower until the end of the phase. And this was errated to give it a limit of 3 times per Protector of Lorien per phase. So with a lot of card draw like Erebor, Glia Wine, Lorien's Wealth that we're going to be talking about, you're probably going to have a huge excess of cards in your hand. This can definitely make a big difference between, say, Denethor or another defending hero from dying or just taking, tolerable amounts of damage. If you need to, say, make all the difference between questing successfully, unsuccessfully, triggering some sort of nasty effect, this can definitely make all the difference. So I think it's a great kind of fix-upper card.
To me, this card's a lot like Favor of the Lady, but more versatile. Instead of just pumping up willpower by 1, you can pump up your defense strength. Drawback is your opponent can't trigger this ability, but I still think it's pretty helpful. It also would combo well with the card that allows you to shuffle back in your discard pile. So if you're worried about maybe discarding some cards you wanted back, well, your discard pile gets put back into your deck, and you're well on your way. So, great card. Again, lore, not my most used sphere. I don't think I played with this card too much, but I definitely don't think it's a bad card in any way.
Yeah. And especially back in the day when Erebor was able to draw an unlimited amount of cards every turn, if players were able to, throw 20 cards into their discard pile to do +20 willpower, that gets pretty ridiculous pretty quickly. Right. If you're looking to just make a big quest push, if you do have 3 copies of this card on a character, you're still able to do up to +9 willpower or defense, so it's definitely an extremely potent card, but it's nowhere near the heights of power it used to be.
Our next to last lore attachment is Dark Knowledge, which is a conditioned attachment that costs 1. It must be attached to a hero, and the hero gets -1 willpower. Its response reads, exhaust Dark Knowledge to look at 1 shadow card that was just dealt an enemy to you. Well, you guys probably know what I'm going to say. It does give you some predictive power. It's maybe okay on your defender like Denethor or something who's probably not questing anyway. But, I guess it could help you know how to plan to spend for your cancel effects. It's just not a card that I'm all that keen on.
Yeah, it's good in that you can say, is it safe to defend this attack? Is it safe to do an undefended attack? But
Right.
especially if you're being attacked by multiple enemies, some shadow cards can have nasty effects that are, nasty enough for, say, 2 creatures. So sometimes it's going to be great. Oftentimes it'll work out pretty well. Sometimes not so much. Uh, just like you said, it is great on Denethor. It's great on, say, Gimli or Glowin, just so you can make sure that they're not going to be taking too much damage. So it's all right. I guess in a solo player game, you could also rely on someone like Hinemarth Riversong or Denethor himself to say, what is this shadow card that's going to be coming off the top of the encounter deck? But it's just one more non-unique way of doing that.
Yep.
And I think that brings us to our very last attachment here, which is self-preservation. So it is cost of 3, and it is a skill. It reads attached to a character, and action is exhaust self-preservation to heal 2 points of damage from attached character. So the easy comparison here is Daughter of the Nimrodel. And the differences, of course, are that can target any hero, where this is only one character that it's attached to. Attachments are generally a little bit hardier than the very fragile Daughter, but you've got to be really happy with the character that you stick this on. So if you're running Glowin or just taking a ton of damage with Gimli, they're probably obvious targets for this. But if you're taking a lot of damage across a lot of different characters, you're probably going to want to lean toward the Daughter.
Right. I think it's great on whoever your defender's going to be, maybe even on Denethor. They can, stuff's always going to, or, most likely going to get through at some point in the game, but you're still going to want to use them to defend. This is a more reliable way, I think, to get rid of that damage without having to exhaust an ally or paying for it with Glorfindel or something. All right, well, that leads us to our lore event cards. The first of which is the lore of Londres. It has a cost of 2, and it reads, action, choose a character, heal all damage on that character. So once again, we've got this theme running through the lore sphere here of healing. I think this card has its uses, but it's perhaps better to heal with the permanent allies or the self-preservation than a one-shot event card for a cost of 2.
Yeah, I guess the nice thing about this is if there's some sort of emergency, you can definitely, heal 100% of the damage on a character, but the obvious downside is that it's not a repeatable effect, unlike self-preservation, unlike Daughter of the Nimrodel. It's a little bit sloppier in that sometimes it could heal 1 damage for 2, sometimes it could heal... like if Gimli with 2 Citadel plates has 12 damage on him, it could heal, all of it. So sometimes it's going to be great, sometimes it's not. The value of this card really just varies tremendously.
Yeah.
But of course, if you're running Glowin, it's great. If you've got Glowin loaded up with Citadel plates, if he's to the point of death, you can make all the difference by just investing a couple of those resources and taking all of your concern immediately away.
Absolutely.
And next is Lorien's Wealth, which is an event cost of 3. Action, choose a player. That player draws 3 cards. So it's awfully straightforward. 3 resources for 3 cards. You convert 1 liquid asset into another. 3 cards is pretty fantastic, but considering Beravor can draw 2, spending an entire turn to draw 3 cards can be a little bit questionable. I do like that you can pick any player, but what have been your experiences playing this card?
Oh, I think that it's got a high cost, and there's easier or cheaper ways to achieve card draw. It's probably not my favorite lore event.
Yeah. I guess my big concern that I've mentioned before is I generally don't play a very lore-heavy deck,
Right.
just because lore in the core set has so many, different roles that it tries to fill. I don't really think it plays to anyone's strength, maybe apart from healing particularly well. So this one is a little bit difficult to get into play. Maybe eventually as we see songs starting to come out, or if you do end up throwing Steward of Gondor, Horn of Gondor on a lore character, it's probably a lot more likely. But all in all, this one, I generally either run very few copies or just skip it completely.
Right. Lore's one of those spheres that it has a lot of expensive cards. And so if you're only using one lore hero, or even two, a lot of these cards are going to be expensive to pay for, and there might, like I said, just be easier or cheaper ways to achieve a similar effect.
Sure, and sometimes I've found myself in this situation where it's like, I could play this now, but if I draw a forest snare or something like that, I'm really going to want to be able to play it as soon as possible. So I'm just conflicted when it comes to lore.
Yeah, absolutely. Our next card is Radagast Cunning, which has a cost of 1, and it says Quest Action. Choose an enemy in the staging area. Until the end of the phase, that enemy does not contribute its threat. This card is very similar, I think, to the card, Mitch, that you'll review next. Do you want to go ahead and read Secret Paths, and then we can sort of talk about these in tandem?
Right. Practically identical. Secret Paths, also cost of 1, is Quest Action. Choose a location in the staging area. Until the end of the phase, that location does not contribute its threat value.
I prefer Secret Paths, because I think locations tend to have higher threat values, usually, I think, than enemies, though I'm just speaking off the top of my head. I could be totally wrong, and if I am, tell me that in the comments. But Secret Paths, maybe I'm just biased by our games in the Progression series, where Secret Paths really came in handy so many times, and I'm not even sure if you included Radagast Cunning, but if you did, it offered little to no help at all.
I think there was one instance where I do use Radagast's Cunning for maybe a couple points, but it seems to be Radagast's Cunning is maybe useful for, say, 2 threat, whereas Secret Paths maybe has a target like the Gladden Fields for 3, or the Brownlands for 5.
Yeah.
In the Escape from Dol Guldur, it's very simple to set up getting the Nazgul with 5 threat onto the table in a way that you never have to quest against that 5 threat, so Radagast's Cunning certainly has its uses, but I would certainly try to include more copies of Secret Paths.
Right.
But I do feel they're both pretty strong one-time use cards, and I think just like you said in one of the videos, this wasn't a card that I immediately gravitated toward when I was doing deck building for the very first several times, but it's definitely one where it's proven itself to be very useful time and time again.
Right. All right, so Gandalf Search is next. This has a cost of X. It's an action. Look at the top X cards of any player's deck, add one of those cards to its owner's hand, and return the rest to the top of the deck in any order. I think it's a great card to help you find the thing you're looking for. I think you played this in Escape from Dol Guldur, and we looked at a couple of, I don't remember how many cards we looked at, and I found nothing good, so it was a bust, but, it certainly could be helpful.
Well, I guess I have to correct you and say I certainly did not play this card.
Oh, you didn't?
No, it was probably the Mountains of Mirkwood response triggering.
Oh, that's what it was.
Right.
That's what it was.
Right, where you look at the top 5 cards.
Right.
I think the problem I have with Gandalf Search, and some people probably do like this card, the problem is, as yet another X cost, is you look at the top X cards. So the more resources you're willing to invest into this, the better it becomes. But you're only adding one of those cards to your hand. You can certainly rearrange your deck, but let's say if you were going to be drawing 2 or 3 cards anyway, 2 or 3 resources spent on drawing 1 card already seems a little bit expensive, and if you're saying spending 10 resources on this, that just seems like such a massive cost, and if you're in a position where you've got that many resources to spend, you're probably already doing really, really well, or there's just some sort of strange situation going on. So this is something where it's just, I like to use my resources gradually for the stuff I draw. I don't like to take a huge risk of blowing, say, maybe 5 or 6 resources hoping to draw, say, a Northern Tracker or something like that, and then having nothing left to try and get it into play.
Right. This card's just so crappy, I can't even remember if it was played or not. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Bye-bye, Gandalf Search.
And then I suppose to finish up the lore sphere, we'll go ahead and talk about Beorn's Hospitality. So another expensive lore card at a cost of 5. It is action. Choose a player. Heal all damage on each hero controlled by that player. So the thing about this card is just like Lore of Imladris, you're healing 100% of the damage, but it's only on heroes instead of characters. It's way more expensive than Lore of Imladris. It is a one-time use. It might just heal one hero a little bit. It might heal all the heroes a lot. I guess the spread is this could heal anywhere from 0 to 24 points, in case, you've got 3 Citadel plates on 3 5-hit point heroes. But have you ever used this to any effect, Matthew?
No. Again, not much of a lore player. It's one of those... the core set, I think, has a lot of cards that cost a lot, sound really cool, and really do have powerful effects. But in reality, they end up just sort of being binder fodder, and they're not going to help you all that often. You would much rather draw an ally or something else.
Yeah. It's just... Beorn's Hospitality, there's going to be a rare situation where one player is just bogged down with a ton of damage where it's going to be great. But really, I guess you could do a daughter for 3 and over 3 turns, which is really slow, but you could do quite a bit of healing. So there's going to be instances where this is the perfect card, but I would just say, just like Fortune or Fate, probably 4 out of 5 times or 9 out of 10 times, this is going to be way too expensive and just not enough of an effect to save you.
Yeah.
Well, now that we've covered all the lore cards, Matthew, are there any particular strengths or weaknesses you think that really stand out?
We started off this little mini-series saying that leadership is the jack of all trades, master of none. And I think lore could maybe be described in a similar way, but I find it less even than I find leadership. Leadership may not excel at any one thing, but I find the cards maybe a little bit better than the lore cards in the core set. So many of them are so expensive, and lore is definitely a support role. I don't think it's a sphere that could do a whole lot on its own without hoping for some really good card draws. Right? If you can get those 4 snares, you can snare all the enemies and then hopefully push your way past other things. But it is my least favorite of all the spheres, just not really my play style at all. The healing is certainly helpful in many ways, but to me, it's kind of just the most uneven of the 4.
Yeah, it seems like a little bit more disjointed. Just like you said, leadership is very versatile, capable attacker, quester, lots of action advantage, resource acceleration. Tactics is absolutely laser-focused on combat. Spirit is questing powerhouse prevention, whereas lore is a little bit of scrying, a little bit of healing, a little bit of tricks here and there, but just... I cannot picture a mono lore deck being successful. It's certainly got plenty of healing to go around, but it doesn't have enough, willpower to really quest effectively. It doesn't have enough defense to necessarily do well. So it just seems like such a strange assortment of supportive cards that really shines, if confined to support some other spheres. So
yeah.
I think by itself, lore struggles.
Yep.
But I suppose with that said, we've covered all but one very important card from the core set. So Matthew, why don't you go ahead and do the honors of discussing the very last card?
Sure. So this is the only neutral card that we have in the core set, and it's everyone's favorite Gandalf. He has a cost of 5, and then he's a bunch of 4s. 4 willpower, 4 attack strength, 4 defense strength, and 4 hit points. He's an Astari, and his text reads, at the end of the round, discard Gandalf from play. Response, after Gandalf enters play, choose 1. You either get to draw 3 cards, deal 4 damage to one enemy in play, or reduce your threat by 5. We have discussed him time and time again. He's seen lots of play so far in our progression series. He's fantastic. This, a lot of times costs of 4 or 5 or 6 really give me pause. I would never hesitate to do a hard cast of Gandalf. I tend to gravitate towards the dealing damage to an enemy or reducing my threat by 5, but I don't think you should overlook the card draw, especially if you're not playing lore or don't have lore support. He's great with so many cards we've talked about. Great with Horn of Gondor. Great with Sneak Attack. Any other leaving play event. He's just simply one of the top cards in the core set, as he very well should be.
Right. I mean, I think if they were to make a card based on Gandalf, given how he is in the books, he, shows up at the specific moment when they need him the most. He does some sort of gigantic effect and then eventually disappears. He's an amazing quester. If you've got some enemy to strike down or smite down, he's able to interplay, deal that 4 damage, commit a giant amount of attack strength. He's great to just absorb attacks if you've got capable heroes by themselves. And then, of course, it's like he just is this amazing preventive character. So he seems to me to be an auto-include in almost every deck. And you and I were talking about it either today or last night, and it just seems as though I'm wondering if there's going to be any point in the series where, I just mean in the entire existence of Lord of the Rings, the card game, where a player doesn't really want to have 3 copies of, say, some iteration of Gandalf in their deck.
Absolutely. I would hope not.
Well, with that said, it looks like we've broken down the core set, we've finished all the different scenarios, we've talked about every single hero card, every single ally, attachment, and event. We've covered all 4 spheres, we've covered our only neutral card. I don't know if there's too much more to say. Any final thoughts, Matthew?
No, this has been a lot of fun. I hope it's helpful for all of those of you who have stuck through our review of the 4 spheres. I've certainly enjoyed going through the cards again and finding some that are a little more useful than I remembered and some that are a little less useful than I remembered. It's really been fun.
Yeah, I think I've definitely enjoyed the LOTR LCG progression series thus far. Just to give you guys a little bit of an idea for what to expect in the future, at this point, Matthew and I are going to go ahead and start doing videos where we talk about the player cards introduced in each subsequent adventure pack and eventually deluxe expansion. Then we'll work our way through those scenarios, as always, trying out different decks, trying out some of the new player cards, getting rid of some of the old ones, bringing back some of the old ones we've maybe, cast by the wayside, or I definitely liked your term you used, Matthew, of binder fodder. But with that said, I think we might as well go ahead and wrap up our last Sphere review video here. So, as always, thank you guys so much for watching. Keep in mind that all of these are just the opinions of 2 different people that love this card game, so feel free to leave your comments in the comments section below of any uses you think we've forgotten, or if we've overlooked a certain ability or been a little bit too critical. And if you like this video, be sure to hit that like button. If you enjoy this series, be sure to subscribe to our channel. So until next time, when we delve into the hunt for Gollum, we'll see you guys later.
See you next time.